this video clip follows on from the previous one and looks at the data that we entered into SPSS last time and starts to analyse it. And what we will do in the analysis, the statistical analysis tests this time, is to look for differences. So you may remember that when we discussed inferential statistics using a PowerPoint, we described that there were two main types of statistical tests, one of which looks for differences between groups and the other looks for links between groups. And t-tests are a useful test for looking at differences between two groups, between pairs of groups. So that's what I'm going to look at on this particular occasion. So remember that we were looking at data that is available to you in the folder called Data on the Moodle module for DSAW 7104. And this is all about patients' length of stay, various conditions, etc. And it links to one of the T-side workbooks that we have used in the past. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. So I'm going to open up SPSS, and you can see that I've put a bit more in it than we had last time. So just recap the variables. We've got length of stay, probably in days, consultant. Now this is a nominal variable, and so we had to give a numerical code for this. And so instead of being able to write Smith, Jones and Wilder, we had to put 1, 2 and 3. We had to give a numerical equivalent, as it were. But these are still nominal variables. We've got income bracket, we've got diagnosis category. So these particular patients are in two different diagnosis categories. Either they've got chronic illness of some sort or they've had trauma. So that's the diagnosis. What I've written down as blood here represents the blood loss that these patients have suffered. Weight A is the weight, their own weight on admission, and weight D is weight on discharge. The actual data sheet may have a different abbreviation. That's the one that I've put in. It doesn't matter really. And here's the data associated with that. And so you can see some of these variables are continuous variables, like length of stay and blood loss, and some of them are clearly categorical or nominal. They only come in one or two versions here, so consultant, income and diagnosis are like that. Well, I'm now going to turn to the T-side workbook number 4. So you can find that again in the folder called Workbooks on the Moodle module, and you may also have a printed version to look at. And you find that the first test that they carry out there tries to see whether there is a significant difference in the amount of blood loss between the two main types of illness that we have here, the chronic illness and the trauma. And so that's the t-test that we're going to do first of all. So we've got two groups, two diagnosis groups. They're not really linked, these are separate patients. So we can say that we need an independent t-test. If it was the same patient, let's say, who had been coming in again with a different ailment, then we might have been able to say, okay, then there's some sort of linkage here. We might do a paired t-test or a dependent measures t-test. But this one's completely independent. So basically, we start off with a hypothesis that maybe these two categories of illness are associated with a different blood loss. So maybe, for example, the blood loss from trauma is significantly different to the blood loss from chronic illness. The null hypothesis associated with that is that there is no significant difference. Remember, the null hypothesis is almost the sort of baseline, nothing has happened type hypothesis. So what do we actually do here then? So again, you can follow this on the workbook. So my recording thing is hiding this a bit, but analyze is up here. Then we go to compare means. We want independent samples t-test because these samples are independent of one another. and we decide then what it is we put in these variables. So the test variable is the same as the dependent variable. In this particular case, it's blood loss that we're interested in. The grouping variable is, well, what's the difference in the two groups? Well, in this case, it's diagnosis, so we put that in the grouping variable. We could also say this is the independent variable. We now need to define the groups that we've got, so we can click there, and because of the diagnosis, we've only got two groups, and we call them 1 and 2, then we can put 1 and 2 in there. And basically then, we click OK, and this is the sort of output that we get. So we can see here that the total number of individuals involved is 20. We can see that we've got means and standard deviations as well, if we're interested in that. These are descriptive statistics that may be valuable to us, that we may wish to talk about. What else have we got? We've got some information here on equality of variances. I won't linger too much on that, but what this is effectively telling us is that the variances of the two groups are similar. They're not significantly different, and this is probably helping us to be able to say, yes, well, it's a fair comparison, really. This whole test calculates a t-statistic. We don't need to worry about that too much. They use something called a degrees of freedom, which in this case is the total number of individuals, 20 minus 2, because we had two groups, but again, we don't need to worry about that. What we are really interested in is this figure of significance. We want to know, are the two groups significantly different from one another? So we'll assume equal variances there, though it doesn't matter either way. It's so in either case, whichever mode of analysis we take, the significance is actually around about 0.4, which is much larger than 0.05. And if you remember, we consider that tests are significantly, we usually use a significance level of 95%, and we say we're looking for a significance that is, if you like, 100 minus 95 or 0.05. This is clearly a lot bigger than that. So what this means is there is no significant difference, in fact, between the blood loss for these two categories. Okay, I don't particularly want that, so I'll get rid of that. And we're going to do one more test, and this is looking at the weight on, comparing weight on discharge and weight on admission. Are those two groups significantly different? Now this time, this is the same patient that we're looking at, and we're looking at changes in their weight, and I'm just scanning my eyes here, and I can see that they all look as if they're a bit lighter coming out of hospital than when they went in. So let's have a look at this then. So again, this test is also in your booklet. So analyze, compare means again, because that's what these tests are doing. They're looking at means, but this time it's paired samples t-test, because in fact we've got pairs of data effectively. So what do we need to do here? We need to identify then which of our variables we're going to put in. So this time we want weight on admission, that's our first variable, and weight on discharge is our second variable. Okay, and what have we got coming out of this? Again, we've got the total number of individuals. We've got means and standard deviations if we want this. This is on weight now. Whoops. And we're looking down to the t-test at the bottom there. And we're looking, and we can see towards the right-hand side, this is the t-statistic that was calculated. And in this particular case, it was the total number minus 1 for degrees of freedom. Don't worry about that. But here's the thing that we're really interested in, the significance, and this says 0.000. Now that's really very small indeed. That's indicating that there is a significance, but it's actually smaller than 0.001, a lot smaller, and certainly a lot smaller than 0.05, and consequently this is highly significant. And as we perhaps were able to notice just by looking at the data beforehand, it does seem then that there's a significant difference between the weight on admission and the weight on discharge, and in fact the weight on discharge appeared to be significantly lower than the weight on admission. So there's a couple of t-tests looking at this data, and I'm going to stop at this point. But there's more information about the data in the booklet, and with a bit of luck I'll tell you about that in another video clip.